How about it for David K. Johnston, everybody?
Hello, Mark. And no, I don't think your voice was choppy, at least not here in Rochester, New York.
Thank you. Well, that's what I needed to hear. Thank you very, very much. Wow, David, there is so much to talk about. I first want to ask you an overall question. And I've said this for a while. I feel it's been a net win for Donald Trump that this trial in New York hasn't been televised. The reputational stink that he could have perhaps picked up with the discussion of all of these ways in which stories were out there and killed, and just what the stories were. I mean, he's rolling around with the Playboy model is paid off. He's rolling around with the porn star. She's paid off. Before you even get to the X's and O's of the law, I just felt the aspect of this that would involve that getting out and sort of revisited to the public, that would be damaging to Trump. But it's not televised, and I think it's a win for Trump. Do you agree?
Yes, and I think it's one of the indications that, contrary to Donald's claims, he's not being unfairly treated here. Now, Judge Merchan has said that he will have the transcripts posted the next day so people can read the cold, lacking emotion and feel material. But I think it would have been much better for the public if we had been able to see the trial, particularly if we could see Donald's behavior in the courtroom, which, according to numerous accounts by journalists from a host of different places, makes it clear that Donald is having a great deal of emotional difficulty with this. I will be surprised if he gets through the next 5 weeks that the trial is expected to last without some kind of a meltdown. He did yesterday when he came out of the courtroom and gave one of his campaign speeches or rants. Donald is a great communicator. One of the reasons he got to the White House is that he knows how to reduce things to, even if they're reduced into lies, to reduce things to be understandable and simple. He was really in the weeds, and I don't know how people could follow him unless they were totally fixated on every aspect of the trial. That goes to the amount of emotional stress he's under. He's probably sleep deprived. His nodding off in the courtroom may well be connected to his health. Donald, has lied about his health. He's 3 inches taller than me and claims to weigh 50 pounds less than I do, and that's just absurd.
The idea, him arguably better than anyone else. I mean, in terms of a reporter. And someone as a journalist looking in, you've x-rayed his finances, his behavior. I mean, your books are filled with different episodes where he's, lashed out. So when you say that he's going to have a meltdown, I kind of take that seriously. And he is being forced to endure these long days. David, wasn't it when he was president, he had executive time till 11 a.m. or something, wasn't it? He never had to start the day before noon.
Donald has never put in long hours his entire life. And one of the things that was shocking during the 2016 campaign was Donald would disappear for several days at a time. And then he would say, Hillary Clinton, she's lazy, she's not going anywhere. And in fact, she was out there in the campaign trail overdoing it to the point where she had that collapse in October of 2016, just because she wasn't getting enough rest and enough fluids. But Donald would just, disappear for 2 or 3 days at a time, which is sort of his standard MO. I suspect if we had his medical records, as we do most other people who become president, the most interesting thing to look at would be his blood sugar levels to see if that's what's prompting him to nod off.
His flatulence in the courtroom is something that has been. I didn't want to address it.
Yeah.
But I guess this is. Thank you, Calvin, for the super chat. I mean, it's weird though that every manner of criticism he'll now endure, including that. I mean, his comportment, the degree to which he behaves, the degree to which he rolls his eyes, all of this stuff is being x-rayed now.
Well, I don't think this is a serious matter, and up until this moment haven't talked about it at all, but given his attacks on Biden and Hillary Clinton when he ran against her on issues of physical health. Joe Biden rides a 10-speed bicycle, and there's video of him, and he tears. He has done push-ups with schoolgirls. I mean, he's clearly in very good physical shape. And Donald is not. I mean, Donald, rides a golf cart when he plays golf. And I'd love to see Donald Trump agree to, in a debate, hey, Joe Biden says, let's do push-ups. Does it Jack Palance at the Academy Awards, drops to the floor, does one-arm push-ups, because I don't think Donald could do them. He's not now, and he never has been, in good shape. He's in fact said about exercise, no point exercising. I mean, your life is a battery, and eventually the battery runs out. And no notion of recharging it or maintaining the battery.
It's also consistent with a guy who was born on third base. Now let me ask you about the trial itself, David K. Johnston.
Yeah.
I mean, there is every manner of notion that I've read, and I even see it in our chat regularly, that at the end of all of this, sure, it may be humiliating on some level. It's going to be disturbing for Trump to be there every day, to have to start his day early in all the ways that we've talked about. But that the connection between the covering up of information for political reasons, to keep it out of the voters' world, it's such that it's election interference, that's just not going to stick, or that they're going to hang this jury because of the one juror who gets information from Truth Social, et cetera. There are ways off the hook, I guess, is what I'm getting at.
Well, that's the reason this jury has 6 alternates. Normally you have 12 jurors and 2 alternates. And I had predicted on your show long ago, I think about a year ago, that there would be at least 4 alternates and probably 6 and maybe even 8. And for exactly this reason. I mean, we had 2 people who were initially seated as jurors who left, and one of them because, thanks to Jesse Waters at Fox, she had been described enough that she was in fear that something would happen to her. And don't be surprised if before this trial is over, the judge finds it necessary to either have detectives escort the jurors to and from where they gather. They do not meet at the courthouse. They meet in an undisclosed location and are brought by the police. Or alternatively, he tells them they're going to have to stay in a hotel for their safety. Donald has made so many threatening and negative comments that somebody who is not particularly mentally stable, or who has decided that democracy doesn't matter, we need Donald as our dictator, may do something violent. Now, the judge today was asked to rule on Trump 11 times, according to the prosecution, violating the restrictions on what he can say. Donald contends he's free to say absolutely anything. He is out on bail. He's out on bail in 4 jurisdictions. When you are freed on bail or your own recognizance, you're not like you and me in the audience. You are subject to the rules of the court. The court could hold you. The court could have you remanded to custody. I don't think the judge is going to do that. I suspect that where this will come home to roost for Donald is if he is convicted when it becomes sentencing time.
The idea, by the way, that you would go through these alternate jurors so quickly, it almost makes you feel like maybe there aren't enough alternate jurors. There is a limited
6
number.
might not prove to be enough. But if there's one juror who is holding out, whether it's an acquittal or a conviction, and it basically tells the other jurors, either in fact or by their conduct, that they're not following the instructions of the court, that juror can be removed. This is not unusual to happen. Judge removes the juror, appoints another alternate, and then directs that they resume at the start their discussion of the case.
I want to get
That's one of the reasons we have the 6 alternates, is in case there's a ringer who lied to get on there. The standard to get on the jury is you will only act on the evidence presented in court. You will follow the law as described by the judge, and you will put aside any pre-existing views you had. People get tried under those conditions every single day.
Gordon is saying lock him up for 30 days for his gag order violations. That's not going to happen, is it, David? I mean, it
Not
doesn't
before
really.
the trial's over, I don't think. I mean, Donald would have to, if Donald has a meltdown and says something directly threatening to the jurors, that would be another matter. And I would expect at that point that the judge would remand him. But I just, knowing Donald as I do for the last, be 36 years next month, I can't see him getting through this trial without some kind of a meltdown. He is not psychologically equipped to do it. Trial was very brief, both Monday and today. Court only met for a relatively brief period of time, and he was having trouble even so.
This is interesting. People are asking, although I thought I've explained this multiple times, and maybe you can do a better job than I've done of explaining what this case is about.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So the charge here is that under New York state law, and there's a similar federal law, if you conspire with someone else to impede an election, to interfere with the election, to hide relevant information in the election, to somehow corrupt the election, that is a crime. And so the allegation here is that in the payments to the porn star, and that's what she wants to be called, Stormy Daniels, not only did they falsify business records to hide this and make it appear that this was legal fees paid to Michael Cohen, but that the purpose was to subvert the election, to corrupt the election. And by putting on David Pecker first, he was the publisher, and I've always thought he was the owner, though I noticed the news accounts don't call him that, the publisher of the National Enquirer and other supermarket tabloids. First, that was a very brilliant move because David Pecker isn't accused of a crime. He has been given immunity by the federal government, and the state has said, we're not going to prosecute you so long as you tell the full, unvarnished truth. He explained how he was summoned to a meeting with Trump and Michael Cohen. And we've known about that meeting for a long time. But what Pecker was able to say is that the purpose of that meeting was that Donald Trump wanted to make sure that no one knew about these sexual indiscretions. And the story apparently is bogus, that he had a love child that the doorman knew about. And David Pecker's testimony is very clear. We didn't do this to hide this from Melania. And one of the most damning things, two of the most damning things are that Michael Cohen recorded on his cell phone Donald Trump's words. They make it clear that this was an evil or foul purpose under the law to affect the election. And secondly, it turns out that after Trump won the Electoral College in 2016, he wanted to not pay Stormy Daniels because it didn't matter if it came out. And that tells you he wasn't worried about Melania. He was worried about getting to office. That's really builds the case for the prosecution. Now, one last thing, Mark. You know, I wrote a piece in the New York Daily News more than a year ago saying that the case that Alvin Bragg, the elected district attorney in Manhattan, should bring is a tax case. Donald created more than 60 fictitious businesses, took business losses that reduced his income taxes. He had done this back in the 80s, was caught, was tried for tax fraud, not criminally, but civilly. He could have been tried criminally. And he was put on notice by the judges, you can't fabricate the existence of a business, have no business records, and then take tax losses. The reason I think Bragg should have brought, and can still bring, the tax case is there's clear, unquestionable evidence of criminal intent. If you're told by a judge, you committed fraud, you can't do that, don't do it again. And the judge, one of the two judges wrote a scathing opinion about this. Even if Trump says, well, I never saw that, doesn't matter. You're responsible for having seen it. He forged the signature of his tax lawyer and accountant on that return. Donald Trump, according to his own lawyer, is a forger. And I think that it would be very easy to convict him on the tax charges. Now, for whatever reason, Alvin Bragg ignored my advice. Not the first time that's ever happened with a public official. But this case, a lot of people are questioning it. Jed Sugarman, who's a very good professor of law. I know a little bit. I'm very familiar with his work. He has a piece in the New York Times today saying he thinks this case is a big mistake. Okay, he's entitled to his opinion. I think trying to subvert an election is an absolutely appropriate thing to do. There's a huge difference between persuading somebody, please don't go public with that story, or denouncing that person if they do, and arranging through a conspiracy and falsifying business records, which in New York, because it's a business center, is an important law. New York City and New York State prosecute people every year, multiple people, for the same underlying crimes here that Trump committed, that the 34 counts go to. People say, please don't do this or that, but paying people off, hiding the records, that's appropriate for a criminal charge. And we'll see what the jury thinks. He is innocent until proven guilty.
Right.
Reasonable doubt.
Yeah. It's interesting. The breaking news of the day, I guess it came out of the AP, I think, that the very visa that he campaigned against.
Donald Trump company Truth Social got approval for an H1B visa. That's the one where you bring a high-tech worker, like a software coder, here to the U.S. For a job that you say you couldn't find any American to do. The job was at the lowest pay you can pay someone for that, which is $65,000. And Donald has always done this. At Mar-a-Lago, he applied and got H1B visas to bring people from Latin America to be wait staff and bus boys and cooks and chambermaids. Of course, when you come on that kind of a visa, you are completely under the control of your employer. If the employer fires you, you have to leave the country immediately. The employer may not even pay you money they owe you. How are you going to collect it after you're sent back? And therefore, you keep your mouth shut and do whatever you're told. And he said he couldn't find any workers in the Palm Beach area. There were 4,000 people who had put their names on state government employment lists that they wanted the kind of work for which Donald hired some dozens of people. How did Donald get around that? Well, they put a one-line ad in the West Palm Beach or Palm Beach business newspaper, not generally read by workers, especially unskilled workers, kitchen workers. And they required you to send your resume by fax. I mean, I don't know a fax machine anymore. Do you?
Right.
And so people didn't see it, and they would have to send only by fax. And they never said where the job was, by the way, or what the pay terms were. Donald always does this. He screams and yells about illegal immigrants. Well, Trump Tower was built with the work of 400 illegal immigrants who he refused to pay until they threatened to kill his project superintendent.
Thank you. I remember this from your book, actually, yes, when I first found out about that.
And when they got paid, Donald sent cash over, and one of his people sat at a card table, and he would peel off cash to these guys, and then you had to stop at them, and they'd sign a chit, and you'd stop at the next table where there was a mob guy, and you had to give him $50, which, when you're only getting $400 or $500 is a lot of money. Why would a mob guy be there? Well, because Donald's been mobbed up his whole life.
So true. That's one of the wild stories in one of your books. I forget which one, but weren't they? I want to say they were from Eastern Europe somewhere.
They're Polish. They were Polish workers.
Thank you.
And Donald, to take down the Bonwit Teller department store, which was 11 stories tall, to replace, so he could build Trump Tower. These guys were living in the building in the middle of winter because they had no money. They were using sledgehammers to bring the building down. They were stripping electric wires with bare hands. The working conditions were horrible. And the funniest thing is, neither the late Wayne Barrett, the first journalist who got on to Donald, I was the second, nor I were ever able to find any indication that a New York City, New York State, or U.S. government building inspector or worker safety inspector came to the site, because they would have certainly, absolutely written it up 6 ways to heaven. And so one has to wonder, gee, who got bribed to stay away, or who got
Right.
menaced by somebody from the mob to stay away?
Uh, it was just this. It speaks to the reason I like this comment as a question to you is because it speaks a little bit to what you know in the decades following him. I was just told that Trump is very upset that there isn't a big demonstration supporting him, says Karen. Maybe this tide is changing, or are MAGA just cowards, or whatever the deal is. But I mean, could you speak to? Do you feel
Yeah.
his support is eroding, or do you think that just the fun is kind of lost from the carnival that is Trump?
Well, first, let's point out that there's no family at the trial. I mean, I've been to lots of trials going back to the 1960s. Usually your spouse or girlfriend or boyfriend or your children or your mom or somebody shows up. Donald's all alone. And I think that speaks volumes about the Trump family, because Donald is all about transactions and his family is all transactions. This is, he has 3 commercial marriages. They're transactional business deals. They're not the kind of marriage I have, and I presume you have if you're married. So then on the larger scale, almost nobody is showing up to demonstrate. There are a handful of people outside the courthouse in Lower Manhattan. I think that's for 2 reasons. The first is that people saw what happened in the effort to overthrow the government. There have now been more than 1,000 people who have been adjudicated, they either pled guilty or were convicted in that case. And, the ringleaders got 20 years and 22 years, if I recall correctly, more than 20 years, which tells you that if Donald is eventually convicted in that case in D.C., the sentence he will get will be more than 20 years, because the judges have been very proportional. If all you did was walk through the building, you get probation. You slugged a cop or hurt a cop, you're going to spend prison time, depending on how much harm you did. And I think Donald's support, as I predicted on this show a long time ago, is waning over time. He's also now, however, gotten the Murdoch family to turn against him. The New York Post cover a couple of days ago was Marjorie Taylor Greene in a Russian army winter hat, the kind that has flaps over your ears with the Russian star on the forehead. And the headline said something like, Moscow Marge, go away. Fox News has done a number of pieces being critical of the MAGA members in the House. Marjorie Taylor Greene filed to remove Mike Johnston as Speaker. The Democrats immediately said, we'll vote to keep him as Speaker, even though he's a Republican. So the power to disrupt and cause trouble and to allow Putin to advance in his efforts to overthrow the government, the democratically elected government. Oh, good, it's up on the screen now. The democratically elected government in Ukraine, that's fading. That is fading. And I think it will continue to fade. On the other hand, people should not be complacent. All Donald has to do, there's some states he's virtually guaranteed to win, like Louisiana. All he has to do is win 6 of the 13 states that are in play, and he's back in the White House, even if the popular vote goes against him, as I predict, by more than 10 million votes.
That's just so remarkable, this flawed system that we have, David.
Well, this is the result of the compromise to allow slavery to continue. I mean, we shouldn't ever lose sight of the fact that, we've done incredible things in the world with our democracy. Very important things. We have made the world a vastly better place. Our country was birthed out of a corrupt moral agreement to allow slavery to continue until 1808, at least, the trade in slavery, the importation of slaves, and to give power to slaveholding states to restrict what was going on in the non-slave states. And we just don't address that honestly when we educate kids. I talked recently to someone who went to high school in the South and was taught in their high school, and this person is under 40, the War of Northern Aggression.
Wow, that's extraordinary.
Yeah, I thought that had gone out about 50 or 60 years ago, but no, my teacher called it the War of Northern Aggression.
And you're saying the legacy of that stain on our history is the Electoral College.
Yeah, absolutely. And somehow we need to address that. I mean, it's absurd that Wyoming, the least populated state with less than 600,000 people, has 3 electoral votes, so 1 per 200,000 people. California has, I believe, now 53, down from 55 members of Congress. So it gets 55 votes for 39 million people in round numbers. This just does not make sense in the modern world. Of course, I've long thought we should divide California into several states, principally not north and south, but coastal and inland.
Look, you'll get a lot of support in different parts of California for that idea. Finishing up here, last question. I'm going to double back to something that you were talking about, because you talk about the transactional nature of Donald Trump, even with family members. And then you mentioned along the way, even with his wives. So I'm seeing in the chat, and there's been much ado about Melania and where is she, but also where is she on the campaign trail, et cetera. The transactional nature of that relationship, I mean, it's not, do you have any insights into it, David? It's not your beat per se, I know, but again, it speaks to,
I've known many people in my life who have what I call commercial marriages. I mean, all you have to do is look at unbelievably drop dead young women who come to LA, where I used to live, and dated a few of them briefly, who are looking for opportunity in life. And if you got bucket loads of money, you could be the ugliest guy in the world. You could be a creep. You could be a terrible guy. If you got a wide open credit card and a mansion and all the dresses you want to buy, you'd be amazed. It's just, and there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. If that's what you have in the marriage marketplace, good for you.
Sure, it's a win-win, maybe.
Yeah, but Donald's relationships are all like that. I interviewed a number of women who Donald either dated or tried to date, including a well-known actress, and they all universally described him as a creep. It was just a common, and this was interviews, some of which go back to the early 1990s. If you think about it, as a young man, Donald Trump is rich. He's like 6'2", pretty good looking guy when he was young. And he couldn't get any woman in New York City to marry him when he decided he needed to get married. And so he goes up and meets a runway model, a hard drinking runway model in Montreal, who, claims to be an Olympic skier and other nonsense. It's all of his relationships are guided by two things: that emotionally he never got past being 13 years old. That year 12, 13, 11, whenever, that we all went through, that was just horrible. And he's stuck there emotionally. And that you don't have to be around Donald very long to realize he's only about Donald. You are not a human being, Mark. You are a object. And either you need to be put to use, or if you're a problem like me, you need to be overcome or blunted if you can. And that's just the nature of who Donald is. And he's never going to change. Frankly, I've always felt very sorry for him. I have people who say, I was on another show early this week, and somebody goes, well, you're just jealous of him because he has lots of money. I got plenty of money. I don't have to be jealous of him. And somebody else says, you hate him. I don't hate Donald Trump. I don't hate the killers and the murders that I solved, that the police failed to solve. It's just my place in the world to go out and tell people about and uncover things about people who matter. Daryl Gates, Barron Hilton trying to steal Conrad Hilton's billions that were to go to poor children. He managed to delay it until he died, and then the starving children of the earth got granddad's money or dad's money. And Donald was somebody I wrote about in 1989 that he might become president of the United States. And I just determined that he was an important cultural force in America. And I was astonished that all the journalists who just printed whatever he said, didn't matter if there was any truth to it, if it was utter nonsense. I do want to say one thing. There's a guy in the, if we've got a second, in the tax named Hultgren.
Right. Chris. Oh yeah. He's troll adjacent.
Well,
but he's right about Trump, I guess. Trump's a spoiled little rich kid. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, no. But let me point out, I think it was Chris, somebody about the Russians and Ukraine. we have spent close to $100 billion so far on the war in Ukraine. This is a war which the Kremlin promised not to invade Ukraine if it gave up its nuclear weapons and gave them to the old Soviet Union, to Russia. And without a single American soldier being put at jeopardy, we have eliminated about half of the capacity of the Russian army to conduct a war. The planes, the jeeps, the helicopters, half. The Russian economy is in awful, terrible shape right now, and it is getting much worse. And about 90%, maybe it's 80% of the money that we have spent isn't going as money to Ukraine. It is hiring Americans who build tanks, rifles, grenades, missiles, drones. It's being spent here in America. And it is protecting us from what Putin says very openly that he intends to do. As soon as he conquers Ukraine, he's going to invade Poland, which is a NATO country, Moldova. I have, by marriage, relatives who live in Slovakia, and my Slovakian relatives are absolutely terrified that if Ukraine loses, they have no question in their mind. The Russian tanks will follow, whether it's a month or 5 years. The Russian tanks will follow, because that's what Putin says he's going to do. If you want to have endless war with Russia for the next 50 years, then you should absolutely be against putting up aid here. I hate the whole concept of war. I would like to see us develop a world where we do everything through diplomacy. I wish someday human beings may do that. Unfortunately, not in my lifetime. But when you have someone like Vladimir Putin who engages in illegal war, follows the ancient Russian tradition of never complying with the rules of war. We've had rules of war for a long, long time in the world. He attacks hospitals with babies in them, old folks' homes, because the Russian practice under the czars was always to terrorize people so they would submit. And so if you are in favor of cutting off the Ukrainians and leaving them alone, I think you clearly have demonstrated that you are against democracy. You have no regard for freedom and liberty except for your own. And if you only care about your liberty, it won't last.
This is certainly a turning point moment. If Putin dies, does it stop? I
No,
mean,
the next guy in line behind Putin is worse than Putin.
It's absolutely like the Wizard of Oz, where they go, she's worse than her sister moment, when the Wicked Witch of the West shows up. Exactly. And this last thing, I was watching a little Fox News, John says, before the show. They're very anti-Ukraine and pro-Russia. I don't know. I don't really watch a lot of them, so I haven't seen what they're doing.
Oh, I just call them Fox, because they're not news. They make stuff up. I mean, Jesse Waters, their 8 o'clock host, a couple of nights ago said, well, you get 2 workers at minimum wage of $20 an hour. They make over $100,000 a year. Guy clearly can't do math. You make $83,000, assuming you work 52 weeks, 40 hours a week.
Yeah.
I think things are changing at Fox. They've begun to turn on some of the Trump supporters, the crazies like Marjorie Taylor Greene. I think that that Lachlan Murdoch, the son of Rupert, who's now in charge, who is much more conservative than his father. His father was very conservative, but he was also very business oriented. Remember, he supported Hillary Clinton for senator. I think that he's reevaluating where Fox is going in the world. And Fox, as a commercial venture, has a serious problem. Their average audience is about my age. And, among my crowd of people, your audience is dying off. And furthermore, we're not likely to buy new products. Whatever brand of beer or car you want to drive, that was sort of settled in your 20s and 30s, not in your 50s, 60s, and 70s.
Yeah. Well, this to be continued, because there's a lot in this Ukraine-Russia thing. I love that you talked about the fact if they disarmed, they were given certain guarantees. Those guarantees haven't been honored. But that we'll double back and get next week. It's such a pleasure to have you back, David K. Johnston. And
Take
I look
care,
forward
Mark.
to our next
Have
conversation.
a wonderful week for you and your audience. Take care.
You too, my friend. Thank you so much. David K. Johnston. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel. to help us save the universe.